You've probably been told to just be nice when dealing with someone difficult, that kindness will soften them, maybe even change them. But if that person is a narcissist, you already know the truth. It doesn't work. Niceness doesn't change a narcissist, it feeds them. So if being nice won't fix it, then what actually will? That's what we're getting into today. When you deal with a narcissist, the very first thing you need to understand is that they thrive on control. And the moment you approach them with endless niceness, you're not disarming them. You're handing them exactly what they want. They don't see kindness as a sign of compassion. They see it as a sign of weakness. They don't interpret your politeness as strength. They interpret it as permission. Every time you tell yourself that being agreeable will ease the tension, you are giving them another inch of space to dictate the direction of the relationship. Narcissists are experts at twisting good intentions. What starts as you trying to maintain peace ends with them sitting in the driver's seat while you are stuck explaining, apologizing, and compromising far beyond what is reasonable. This is why niceness alone doesn't work, because in their eyes, it's not kindness, it's compliance. And once they see compliance, they push harder. They test you more. They press on boundaries you never thought you would let them cross. And before you realize it, you've been trained into playing by their rules. Think about the times you've gone out of your way to avoid conflict. Maybe you told yourself that staying calm, being agreeable, and showing patience would eventually break down their walls. You thought they might recognize your effort and respond with the same level of care. But what actually happened? Instead of gratitude, they gave you more demands. Instead of respect, they gave you more criticism. Narcissists don't take niceness as a sign to meet you halfway. They take it as an opportunity to step all the way into your space. They don't think, wow, this person is so kind, I should treat them better. They think, I can get away with more. I can pull more strings. I can control the pace of this interaction. That's why people who try to solve everything with kindness often end up more drained than anyone else, because they are investing in a strategy that only fuels the problem. A narcissist's control depends on how much you're willing to give them. When you bend, they don't see sacrifice, they see leverage. When you explain, they don't see understanding, they see an opening. When you forgive too quickly, they don't see love, they see an eraser they can keep using to wipe away accountability. This cycle repeats because you've been conditioned to believe that being endlessly nice is the higher road. But in their world, it's not the high road, it's the easy road they can walk all over. That's why they continue to escalate. They sense that you won't push back. They sense that you'd rather keep the peace than confront the reality. And so they grow bolder with their manipulation. They aren't fueled by your resistance, they're fueled by your surrender, and when that surrender comes wrapped in a smile, they exploit it even more. Niceness to a narcissist isn't seen as generosity, it's seen as currency. And once they know you'll pay with kindness every time there's tension, they know they own the bank. They don't stop and reflect. They don't feel guilt. They don't suddenly wake up and change because you've been good to them. What they feel is entitled, as if your endless patience is proof that they are allowed to keep behaving the way they do. And here's the most important part. They don't stop when you give more. They escalate until you have nothing left to give. That is why people often feel completely drained after dealing with a narcissist, because they were taught to believe that being endlessly nice would eventually melt the ice. Instead, all it did was harden the narcissist's grip on the situation. So the more you respond with niceness without boundaries, the more you encourage the narcissist to stay in control. They thrive on that dynamic because in their eyes, every "it's okay," every "don't worry about it," every "I'll handle it" is another confirmation that they are the one running the show. And if you keep handing them that power, they will never let go of it. The shift happens when you stop focusing on managing their reaction and start controlling your own boundaries. Because boundaries are the one thing a narcissist cannot twist once you actually enforce them. For so long, the pattern is the same. You measure every word, you calculate every step, you anticipate every possible explosion, and you twist yourself into knots just to avoid setting them off. That's managing their reaction, and it keeps you trapped because no matter how much effort you put in, they will always find another reason to criticize, another excuse to blame, another way to pull you back into their chaos. You spend hours replaying conversations in your head, trying to figure out if you said the wrong thing or not enough. When the truth is, it doesn't matter what you said, they were going to twist it anyway. That's their power, and that's why people end up exhausted, confused, and doubting themselves. But the moment you stop trying to manage their storm and instead take full ownership of your own umbrella, everything changes. Boundaries are not about controlling them, they're about controlling you. They are not about punishing, they are about protecting. And that's what a narcissist can't manipulate once you mean it. They can yell, they can guilt trip, they can twist the narrative, but they cannot override the fact that you choose how much access they get, you choose what you will tolerate, and you choose how you respond. That's the piece most people miss. They think boundaries are about trying to make the narcissist act differently, but they aren't. Boundaries are about making you act differently. It's a shift from saying, how do I make them stop, to how do I stop giving them permission? Because at the end of the day, you cannot control their behavior, but you can control how much of it reaches you. When you start setting real boundaries, you move from reaction to decision. Instead of thinking, if I'm nice enough, maybe they won't get angry, you begin to say, if they get angry, that's on them, but I won't allow it to control me. That's power they can't stand, because for the first time, you're not bending, you're not negotiating, you're not explaining yourself into exhaustion. You're calmly and consistently holding a line they don't know how to cross. And make no mistake, they will test that line. They will push, they will guilt, they will try to make you feel selfish, cold, or unkind. But that is the very proof that the boundary matters, because if it wasn't disrupting their control, they wouldn't fight it so hard. Boundaries also expose the truth they don't want to face. Without your constant compliance, they lose their power. The game only works when you keep playing, and boundaries are how you quietly step off the board. Suddenly, the control they had isn't working because you're not reacting the way you used to. You're not defending yourself for hours. You're not apologizing for things you didn't do. You're not trying to fix their moods. You've shifted the focus entirely away from them and onto yourself, and that's a language they can't speak. They can only manipulate if you give them the room, and boundaries shrink that room smaller and smaller until there's no space left for them to operate. The strength of boundaries is consistency. It's not about saying it once and hoping they listen. It's about showing up the same way every single time, calm, clear, and steady. They will try to wear you down. They will wait for the moment you slip back into old habits. But that's why boundaries have to become part of who you are, not just something you say. It's not about the narcissist agreeing with your boundary. It's about you agreeing with it and living it. And once you reach that point, when your focus is no longer on micromanaging their reactions, but on guarding your own peace, the dynamic shifts completely, because control can only survive where there are no boundaries. And the moment you stand firm, you take back the power they were never supposed to have in the first place. Instead of giving them the emotional fuel they want, which is your frustration, your explanations, your approval, your defenses, and even your attempts to prove yourself, the real shift happens when you start taking that energy back and putting it into your own choices, your calm, and your silence when necessary. A narcissist feeds on reaction because reaction is proof that they still have power over you. The sighs, the long drawn-out explanations, the heated arguments, the endless attempts to clear your name, every single one of those is like fuel tossed into their fire. They don't care if your reaction is positive or negative. They only care that it exists, because reaction equals attention, and attention equals control. That's why even when you try to explain yourself to make them understand, it doesn't calm them. It gives them more ammunition. They'll twist your words, throw them back at you later, or use them as proof of how wrong you are. So when you stop handing out that emotional fuel, the game begins to shift. Taking that energy back means refusing to over-explain when they accuse you of something you didn't do. It means choosing silence when they try to bait you into defending yourself. It means refusing to hand over your approval just because they demand validation. At first, it feels unnatural because your instinct is to defend, to prove, to smooth things over. You don't want to look cold or careless. You want to show that you mean well. But narcissists are not wired to see that good intent. They are wired to use every bit of energy you give them to reinforce their control. So when you withdraw that energy, when you stay calm, when you speak less and act more, they don't know what to do with it. They feel the lack of fuel, and it unsettles them. Your calm becomes a boundary in itself. When you stop raising your voice, when you stop chasing them down for clarity, when you stop sending long explanations they never asked for but always use against you, you are telling them without words that they no longer have access to the most valuable resource you have, your emotional energy. Silence is not weakness here, it's strength, because silence is something they can't twist. A calm tone is not surrender, it's control, because they can't spin it into chaos the way they can with your anger. Your refusal to defend every little attack is not neglecting the relationship, it's reclaiming your balance. This is what they hate most, because they don't lose power when you argue, they lose power when you stop giving them anything to work with. Think about how often they've dragged you into circles with conversations that never end. You go in hoping for resolution, and you come out more confused than when you started. That's because they weren't looking for resolution. They were looking for fuel. They wanted the back and forth, the proof that they still occupy your mind, the evidence that they still control your emotions. When you take that away, when you stop playing tug of war by simply dropping the rope, the entire dynamic shifts. They can pull and pull, but if you're no longer holding on, there's nothing left to win. Taking your energy back doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming intentional. You're not ignoring them. You're choosing when and how to respond. You're not shutting down. You're showing up differently. You're refusing to let their chaos dictate your peace. That's where real control is found, not in trying to change their behavior, but in guarding your own. The moment you understand that every word, every defense, every drop of approval is currency in their world, you also understand that you've been funding their control all along. And the moment you stop making those payments, they no longer have the same grip on you. That's the shift, not in them, but in you. And that's when the power starts coming back where it belongs. Narcissists can't handle when you detach emotionally, when you stop playing their game and stop trying to win them over, because the power was never in changing them. It was always in changing how you show up. For so long, you've been trained to think that if you just try harder, if you just prove your loyalty, if you just explain yourself better, eventually they'll see your worth. But that's the trap. A narcissist survives on that pursuit, the constant proving, the endless cycle of you chasing their approval. The more you give, the more they raise the bar. The more you try to meet them where they are, the more they step back and watch you exhaust yourself. Emotional detachment breaks that pattern because it means you're no longer auditioning for a role they'll never let you win. It's not about shutting yourself off from the world. It's about shutting yourself off from the hooks they use to reel you in. They thrive when you're emotionally invested, when your mood rises and falls based on their treatment of you. Detachment means you've reclaimed control of that switch. When you stop playing their game, you take away the scoreboard they keep in their head. They measure their success in how much of your attention they can control, how much of your day they can hijack, how much of your peace they can disturb. Every argument you chase, every apology you force out of yourself just to keep the peace, every attempt to fix the relationship is another point in their column. But when you detach, when you stop keeping score with them, you rob them of the very thing they use to feel superior. They can throw their insults, they can toss out their guilt trips, they can sit in silence to punish you. But if you are no longer reacting, no longer begging, no longer spiraling, then their tactics fall flat. Detachment is powerful because it signals that you've stopped needing their approval to validate your choices. They want you dependent on their praise because as long as you are, they can control when you feel good about yourself. When you detach, you show them that you can stand steady with or without their validation. That is what breaks their grip, because they are no longer the source of your worth. You are. They can't manipulate someone who doesn't rely on them emotionally. And that's why they push back harder the moment you start detaching. They sense it, they feel the shift, and it threatens their control. They'll accuse you of being cold, of not caring, of being the problem. But that's just projection, because what they really mean is they can't control you the way they used to. Playing their game always leaves you losing because the rules are designed so that you can't win. They change the goalposts, they twist the story, they manipulate the outcome, so no matter what you do, you're wrong, you're selfish, you're ungrateful. Detachment says, I'm not playing anymore. It's not about convincing them you're right. It's about no longer needing their agreement to move forward. And when you reach that point, you're no longer trapped in their cycle. You stop trying to decode every word. You stop trying to anticipate their moods. You stop carrying the weight of their reactions. Instead, you let them carry their own. That's what makes detachment so threatening to them, but so freeing for you. Changing how you show up doesn't mean you change into someone cold or unfeeling. It means you change into someone grounded, steady, and unshaken by their chaos. You're not abandoning your compassion. You're reclaiming your control. You're not becoming indifferent to people. You're becoming immune to manipulation. And that is what a narcissist cannot handle, because once you detach, they lose the one thing they've relied on all along: your emotional investment in their game. What actually changes the dynamic is clarity and consistency, because when you draw the line, when you hold it, and when you refuse to negotiate your peace, you take away the unpredictability that narcissists use to their advantage. They thrive in confusion. They thrive when you say one thing but do another, when you let things slide today but get upset about them tomorrow, when you threaten to set a boundary but end up softening it because you feel guilty. That inconsistency is their playground. It gives them room to twist your words, to call you a hypocrite, to claim you're the unreasonable one. But when you decide where your line is and you hold it every single time, it removes the gray area they depend on. They can argue, they can complain, they can push. But if you don't move, if you don't waver, eventually they realize they can't use the same tactics on you anymore. Clarity means you are no longer vague about what you will and will not tolerate. You stop dropping hints. You stop hoping they'll pick up on your feelings, and you stop expecting them to read your mind. Instead, you state it directly and calmly. This is what I accept. This is what I don't. This is how I will respond if it happens. Narcissists don't like clarity because it pins them down. They want things loose and undefined so they can bend the rules whenever it suits them. But when you are clear, there is no bending. When you are consistent, there is no loophole. That's when the dynamic begins to shift, because you're no longer playing in the fog they created. You've stepped into solid ground. Consistency is where the real power lies. It's one thing to set a boundary once, it's another to enforce it every time. Narcissists are patient manipulators. They wait for the slip, the moment you're tired, the day you let something slide because you don't want to argue, the time you decide it's easier to give in. And once they see that crack, they use it. They'll push harder. They'll remind you of the one time you backed down. They'll test you over and over because they believe you'll eventually fold again. That's why consistency is critical. It shows them that no matter how many times they try, the line doesn't move. You're not threatening, you're not warning, you're simply acting every time, calmly, steadily, without negotiation. And this is what unnerves them most, when you stop negotiating your peace. For so long, you've probably thought of peace as something you have to bargain for. If you explain yourself enough, if you give up enough, if you smooth things over enough, maybe you'll earn a little peace. But real peace doesn't come from their approval. It comes from your refusal to hand it over to them in the first place. You don't have to give up your calm just because they're angry. You don't have to trade your self-respect just to avoid their silent treatment. You don't have to lower your standard just to make them comfortable. That is what consistency teaches you, that your peace is not up for debate. It's not something you give away in hopes they'll treat you better. It's something you protect, because without it, you lose yourself. The combination of clarity and consistency strips away their control. They can accuse, they can deflect, they can lash out, but the game stops working because you're no longer bending to it. You're not explaining the same thing 100 times. You're not arguing in circles. You're not changing your stance to keep them calm. You've drawn the line, you've held it, and you've shown them that your peace isn't for sale. That's when the dynamic changes, not because they've transformed, but because you have.